Imagine waking up, driving down to your local grocery store and finding out a carton of eggs or, a bag of rice costs double what it did yesterday.
Right.
Just overnight. Exactly, overnight. And not because of inflation or like a bad harvest, but because two countries 6,000 miles away failed to sign a piece of paper.
It's wild to think about.
It really is. And today is Sunday, June 14th, 2026. And as you're listening to this deep dive, the whole world is basically holding its breath, waiting on that exact signature. We are watching two massive historic geopolitical events just, well, basically collide in real time.
Yeah, front and center.
Right. So on one side of the ledger, we've got this stack of breaking reports detailing a highly anticipated, monumental U.S.-Iran peace deal. And then right on the other side, we have these sudden, lethal Israeli airstrikes hitting right in the heart of Beirut.
And caught right in the middle of all that collision is a $1 trillion economic shockwave tied to the ongoing blockade of the Strait of Hormuz.
$1 trillion. I mean, it's a precarious, almost unbearable contradiction, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The diplomatic efforts that are, designed to calm the region and the military escalations threatening to tear it apart, they are fundamentally intertwined on this specific Sunday.
And that intersection, where a treaty resting on a desk meets a bomb dropping in Lebanon, that is our mission for today's deep dive. We're going to unpack how a potential diplomatic triumph and the sudden military escalation are locked in this high-stakes dance. And crucially, we're going to look at what all of this geopolitical maneuvering actually means for you, for your wallet, the price of your groceries, and just global stability overall.
Yeah, but, before we really get into the weeds on the mechanics of all this, I think it's important to set some ground rules.
Definitely.
The sources we're analyzing today, they cover some incredibly sensitive, politically charged actions and statements involving the United States, Israel, and Iran.
Right. So just to be crystal clear with you, the listener, we are not here to take any political sides today.
Not at all.
We aren't endorsing the viewpoints or the actions of any of the nations involved. Our goal is strictly and, impartially to report the facts exactly as they're presented in the source material. We just want to help you understand the very complex dynamics at play here without any editorializing on who is right or wrong.
Exactly. We're just looking at the gears, turning beneath the headlines, focusing on the stated motivations and the tangible consequences of those actions.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the peace deal itself, because the scale of what is being proposed here is just staggering.
Massive.
Right. We're talking about a massive memorandum of understanding and MOU that has been mediated behind the scenes by Pakistan and Qatar.
And honestly, the choice of mediators alone tells a really fascinating story.
How so?
Well, Pakistan and Qatar are acting as the crucial bridges here. Qatar has long hosted immense U.S. military bases, while at the same time maintaining these open back channels with Tehran.
Right. Playing both sides of the diplomacy.
Exactly. They offer the logistical and the financial safety needed for these talks. And then Pakistan, sharing that long, porous border with Iran, they have a massive vested interest in regional stability. So they step in where traditional European diplomats might really struggle to get any traction.
Makes sense. And the terms they've hammered out are just massive. I mean, if signed, this deal involves the immediate reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, a phased lifting of the U.S. naval blockade on Iranian ports, and the release of roughly $24 billion in frozen Iranian assets.
$24 billion. I mean, it's a historic financial and logistical concession, but it comes with equally historic stipulations.
Right.
President Trump is heavily pushing this deal, projecting an immense amount of confidence right now. He's claiming that an electronic signing is actually happening today, and he's touting this agreement as a wall to no nuclear weapon.
Okay, so what does that wall specifically entail in the text of the actual deal?
Mechanically, it means Iran would commit to not developing nuclear arms indefinitely.
Wow, indefinitely.
Yeah. In exchange for the financial relief and the lifting of the maritime blockade, the U.S. would actively secure and destroy Iran's stockpiles of enriched uranium.
Okay.
So from the Trump administration's viewpoint, this permanently neutralizes Iran's nuclear path while simultaneously unfreezing a massive portion of global trade. They're, positioning it as a definitive historic victory.
But just as they're preparing to take a victory lap, finalize this electronic signing, the interrupting event happens.
That wild card.
The Israeli Air Force conducts what they describe as, quote, precise strikes on a Hezbollah command center. And this is located in the Dahaya district of southern Beirut.
Right.
And for a bit of context for you listening, Dahi is this densely populated suburban area, but it also fundamentally operates as the political and military nerve center for Hezbollah. The Lebanese civil defense actually reported recovering 3 bodies and rescuing 6 wounded people from the rubble of a 5-story building in the Goberi neighborhood.
Yeah, the location is definitely significant, but the timing of this strike is what makes it incredibly volatile.
Because of the signing.
Exactly. The ordnance dropped right as the diplomatic window in the region was supposedly closing in on a final signature.
I mean, I'm looking at the timeline being projected by the U.S. claiming an electronic signature is imminent, and it just seems completely detached from the reality on the ground.
It really does.
You've got a $24 billion U.S.-mediated peace deal sitting there, and Israel conducts a lethal strike in Lebanon. I mean, it feels like we are trying to build a house of cards while someone is actively kicking the table. Why strike now?
What's fascinating here is how wildly the justifications for that timing diverge depending on whose intelligence you're actually reading.
Okay.
If you look at the official statements from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office, they argue this is a strictly defensive, geographically necessary military response.
Right, because of the rocket fire?
Exactly. They point to a preceding 72-hour window of persistent Hezbollah rocket and drone fire directed right into northern Israel. So their stated position is that, look, a peace deal cannot require a sovereign nation to just ignore active incoming threats on its own northern border.
Yet the people actively mediating the deal view the motivation through a completely different lens, right?
Yeah, they absolutely do. Sources involved in the Pakistan and Qatar-led negotiations view this strike as a deliberate, calculated attempt at sabotage.
Sabotage of the U.S. deal.
Yes. Israel has been notably sidelined in these specific back-channel talks. So the theory among the negotiators is that an alienated Israel is attempting to basically blow up President Trump's deal. The suspected goal is to force the U.S. to abandon diplomacy and return to active military combat engagement alongside Israel in the region.
Wow. And looking at the immediate fallout, I mean, that sabotage theory carries some weight because Iran's stance instantly hardened. They're publicly calling Trump's timeline of signing today, quote, speculative. They haven't abandoned the table entirely, but they drew a massive line in the sand. They basically said there will be no deal and no reopening of the Strait of Hormuz without a complete halt to Israeli strikes in Lebanon.
Yeah, the rhetoric coming out of Tehran shifted from diplomatic to entirely combative in a matter of hours.
Yeah.
Iran's chief negotiator, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, he publicly questioned if the U.S. lacks the will or ability to restrain its own ally.
Which is a huge accusation.
Huge. He essentially asked, what is the point of signing a U.S.-backed peace treaty if the U.S. cannot control the military actions of its closest regional partner?
And the military wing in Iran is aggressively escalating the threat level, too. The deputy commander of Iran's top military command, Mohammad Farsadi, he explicitly threatened retaliation.
Right.
He stated the actions in Beirut won't go unanswered. And if Iran launches a direct missile response, this entire fragile ceasefire just disintegrates.
And that severe risk of regional ignition explains why we saw a very rare, highly public rebuke from President Trump directed at Israel.
Yeah, he was not happy.
No, he called the Israeli strike meaningless and demanded that all sides stand down. He explicitly linked the Beirut strike to the peace process, issuing this stark warning that it should not have happened on a day when a historic agreement was inches away from completion.
So the U.S. is desperately trying to hold the framework together.
Desperately.
Because if that framework collapses, the consequences hit a lot closer to home than Beirut or Tehran.
Yeah.
Let's pivot from the political fragility to how this actually hits the lister's daily life.
Yeah, the economic side.
Right, because if this deal dies on the table, the economic relief the entire world is waiting for just vanishes.
And the financial stakes are astronomical. I mean, analysts are currently referring to the proposed agreement as the cost of peace. And they estimate the value of this deal to the global economy is $2.2 trillion.
$2.2 trillion. That is, I mean, you can actually see the global market reacting to just the rumor of peace.
Oh, absolutely.
Before this deal looked possible, back when the conflict peaked after the March closure of the Strait of Hormuz, Brent crude oil was trading at over $120 a barrel. And just on the news that a deal might be signed today, that price plummeted to $87.33.
It's a massive drop.
The massive conflict premium that was built into global energy simply vanished on the hope of a signature.
But the energy sector is really just the first domino here. We need to look at the grocery emergency currently devastating the Gulf states.
Right, the food supply.
Yeah, the sources indicate that these nations are facing a 70% disruption in their food imports strictly because of the maritime blockades.
70%. I was reading about a major retailer over there, Lulu Retail, and they are seeing price spikes on basic goods anywhere from 40 to 120%.
And to understand why that happens, you really have to look at how maritime insurance works.
Right, the war risk premium.
Exactly. A shipping company isn't going to move a massive cargo vessel full of wheat or electronics without insuring the hull. So when a vital shipping lane becomes an active war zone, maritime insurers in places like London jack up what is called the war risk premium.
And that premium is no joke?
No, it can jump from a fraction of a percent to over 1% of the entire ship's value per voyage. So if you're moving a $100 million ship, that is a sudden, unbudgeted $1 million fee just for the insurance.
And the shipping company doesn't eat that cost. They pass it directly to the importer, who passes it directly to the consumer at the supermarket. The report suggests that if the strait reopens, those maritime insurance costs would be slashed by almost 60% for major importers like India, cooling inflation almost instantly on paper.
On paper, yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because I'm looking at all this market optimism, and I see a massive blind spot.
Okay, what do you mean?
People see the crude oil price drop and assume that if Trump signs the deal on Sunday, their gas is cheap and their groceries are back to normal by Monday morning. But we don't just flip a switch.
Right.
It's not like turning off a Wi-Fi router, waiting 30 seconds and turning it back on. It feels more like trying to restart a massive, complex factory that has been flash frozen in ice for 3 months.
You are absolutely right to challenge that wave of immediate optimism. The market is pricing in the diplomatic victory, but it is completely ignoring the physical engineering reality. Analysts refer to this disconnect as the Hormuz paradox.
The Hormuz paradox. So the diplomatic agreement is instantaneous, but the physical reality of global shipping and energy extraction is painfully slow.
Exactly. Let's start with the surface level, the boats. Even if the waters of the strait are declared 100% safe this afternoon, the physical transit of oil takes time.
Right, they have to physically sail there.
Yeah, it takes roughly 1 month for a fully loaded large crude carrier to travel from the Persian Gulf to major Asian markets like China. There is a rigid 30-day physical delay built into the global supply chain before that newly freed oil ever reaches a refinery.
So even if the ink is drying today, the relief is a month away just based on the cruising speed of a cargo ship. But the paradox goes much deeper than that, literally underground.
Yes.
Because the oil hasn't just been sitting in giant tanks waiting for a boat to arrive.
No, and this is the most critical hurdle. Because of the 100-day blockade, the storage facilities filled up entirely. There was nowhere for the newly extracted oil to go.
So what did they do?
Consequently, producers in the region were forced to shut down roughly 10,000 active oil wells.
Wait, 10,000 individual wells taken offline?
10,000. And restarting an oil well after a 100-day pause is an unprecedented technical nightmare.
Why is it so hard? Don't you just open the valve?
Not at all. An oil well isn't just a pipe. It relies on very delicate subterranean pressure dynamics. When you cap a well for that long, it is a bit like shaking a soda bottle and leaving it sealed. The pressure equalization shifts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, sediment and heavy waxes build up and harden within the pipes. The mechanical valves degrade from lack of flow.
So when you go to uncap it 100 days later, the oil doesn't just naturally rush back to the surface.
Frequently, it won't. Operators often have to deploy specialized equipment to clear the blockages, or in severe cases, drill entirely new lateral lines just to re-access the reservoir.
That sounds incredibly expensive.
It is. Industry engineers warn that some of these 10,000 wells may never return to their pre-war production levels. The 13 million barrels a day of stranded Gulf exports won't magically appear tomorrow. The recovery is a grueling, highly technical process.
Okay, wait. If 10,000 wells have been shut down and ships haven't been able to move through the world's most critical energy choke point for 100 days, why hasn't the global economy entirely collapsed?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. People are still driving cars in Asia. The lights are still on in Europe. How did the world actually survive the last 3 months?
Well, it survived because the countries in the region, specifically Saudi Arabia and the UAE, executed an absolute masterclass in crisis logistics.
What did they do?
They spent the last few months aggressively activating massive workarounds. They essentially built physical bypasses to keep the global economy's pulse going while the main artery was severed.
And the scale of these bypasses is incredible. We are talking about utilizing sprawling land-based pipeline networks to physically route the oil around the Strait of Hormuz.
Exactly.
Saudi Arabia leaned heavily on their east-west pipeline, known as Petroline. This is a massive piece of infrastructure. It is 1,200 kilometers long. It takes crude oil from the Abqaiq processing plant in the east and pumps it all the way across the Arabian desert to the port of Yanbu on the Red Sea, completely bypassing the blocked Gulf.
And they fast-tracked critical upgrades on this pipeline in early 2026 to push its mechanical limit to 7 million barrels per day.
7 million.
Yeah. However, it is important to note the operational reality versus the theoretical capacity. While the pipeline itself can handle 7 million barrels, the export capacity is currently bottlenecked at the Yanbu port to about 4.5 million barrels per day due to local refining constraints.
Still, successfully pushing 4.5 million barrels to the safe waters of the Red Sea has been a vital lifeline.
Oh, absolutely vital.
And I was looking at the 80 COP pipeline in the UAE, and it's doing similar heavy lifting. The Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline runs about 400 kilometers from the Habshan fields directly to the port of Fujairah.
And Fujairah's location is key there.
Right, because it's crucially located on the Gulf of Oman, safely outside the Strait of Hormuz. It's moving 1.5 to 1.8 million barrels a day, and the UAE is accelerating plans to double that capacity by 2027. But it made me wonder, are these pipelines enough to actually offset the loss of the strait entirely?
They are a tourniquet, not a cure. There is a massive strategic vulnerability here. Even running at absolute maximum capacity, these alternative pipelines only handle about 40% of the normal energy volume that usually transits through the strait.
That's a huge gap.
It is. Furthermore, just because they bypass the geographical choke point doesn't mean they are immune to the wider conflict.
Yeah, we saw that firsthand. In March 2026, Iranian drone strikes actually targeted Fujairah.
Exactly.
It temporarily suspended oil loadings and proved a terrifying point. Moving the oil outside the strait does not guarantee immunity from regional military escalation.
It highlights the extreme fragility of relying solely on fixed, highly visible energy infrastructure during a war.
Which brings me to the part of the sources that completely blew my mind.
Right.
While the pipelines are struggling to move the oil, what about the physical goods? The food for the grocery emergency, the retail goods, the construction materials?
Right, the things people need every day.
Exactly. The most successful workaround for physical cargo wasn't a maritime route at all, it was a train.
The transformation of the Etihad rail system.
Yes. The UAE took the Etihad rail network and turned it into an emergency land bridge almost overnight. To bypass the naval blockades, cargo ships would arrive at ports outside the strait, offload their containers, and put them directly onto this massive freight rail network.
Which is brilliant logistics.
And the statistics are staggering. In just one 9-day period, this railway moved 459,000 tons of cargo. That equates to roughly 7,900 shipping containers bypassing the war zone entirely by land.
To put the sheer efficiency of that into perspective, one fully loaded freight train on this network replaces up to 300 heavy trucks on the road.
That's insane.
But beyond the efficiency, there is a distinct geopolitical advantage to using rail. Striking an oil pipeline is often viewed as a standard tactical move in regional conflicts. But deliberately targeting a civilian rail line moving essential food and consumer goods, that triggers massive international law violations.
So it operates under a slightly thicker shield of geopolitical safety? And it wasn't just freight. They extended the 900-kilometer network all the way to Guifat on the Saudi border. Back in March, when regional flights were totally suspended due to the conflict, Etihad Rail actually ran passenger repatriation trains from that Saudi border all the way to Abu Dhabi just to get stranded citizens and residents back home.
Wow.
It was a flawless execution of emergency logistics.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this railway isn't going to quietly go back to being a background infrastructure project once the peace seal is signed.
You don't think so?
Not a chance.
Sure.
The crisis has proven its immense, undeniable value. Post-deal, this network is set to pivot into a permanent, heavily utilized logistics corridor. The UAE is aiming to use this exact rail infrastructure to double the region's non-oil GDP by 2030.
Wow.
Yeah, the emergency workaround is basically evolving into the permanent backbone of their future economy.
So what does this all mean? If we pull all these disparate threads together, we have the fate of global energy prices, the release of $24 billion in frozen assets, and a historic MOU permanently halting Iran's nuclear ambitions, all sitting on a desk waiting for an electronic signature.
All resting on that one signature.
But every single one of those triumphs hinges entirely on whether the U.S. can assure Iran that the sudden Israeli military strikes in Beirut will cease.
It is the ultimate diplomatic tightrope. The outcome of this specific Sunday dictates the global cost of maritime shipping, the price of fuel at your local pump, and whether the severe grocery emergency disrupting supply chains across the world will finally conclude, or if we are bracing for another devastating economic spike.
Which leaves me with a final provocative thought for you to mull over long after you finish listening today. We just talked about how successfully the UAE and Saudi Arabia utilized these massive overland pipelines and the Etihad Railway to completely bypass the Strait of Hormuz during a 100-day blockade. They proved that the global economy can, with some mechanical strain, find a back door. By proving they can survive without it, could this crisis permanently diminish the geopolitical power of the Strait of Hormuz itself?
That's a fascinating question.
Are we witnessing the exact moment where emergency overland workarounds transform into the permanent, everyday future of global trade, making the world's most dangerous choke point suddenly irrelevant?
You know, when you build a highly efficient bypass to survive a crisis, you rarely return to the congested, dangerous highway once the traffic clears. The map of global trade might literally be permanently rewritten.
As of right now, the diplomats are still sweating over that final signature, and the explosions in Beirut ensure the table is still shaking. But maybe, just maybe, the world has quietly built a new table in the other room. We want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking for the mechanical systems beneath the headlines, and we will catch you on the next one.